There is a checkerboard painted on a hillside above Hong Kong, orange and white, big enough to see from the cockpit of a jumbo jet. For 73 years, that painted square was the most important piece of navigation equipment at one of the busiest airports on Earth. Not a radar system, not a satellite beacon, a square of paint on a hill. That tells you everything you need to know about Kai Tak. It began with a real estate deal that went nowhere. In 1912, two Hong Kong businessmen named Ho Kai and Ao Tuk bought up reclaimed land on the edge of Kowloon Bay and tried to build a residential neighborhood on it. They ran out of money. The land sat empty. The government stepped in, stitched their names together, and eventually let a flying school use the flat ground for a grass strip. The first aircraft rolled down that strip on Lunar New Year's Day, 1925. Nobody was thinking about international aviation. Nobody was thinking much at all beyond getting the planes off the ground. Then the war came. Japan occupied Hong Kong in December 1941 and needed the field as a military airbase. They tore down the ancient stone walls of Kowloon walled city and used the rubble to extend the runways, forcing Allied prisoners of war to do the labor. Diary entries from those POWs survive. They describe grinding work under a brutal sun. Some tried to sabotage the concrete by mixing in clay. It didn't hold. The runways outlasted them. When Britain returned after the war, refugees were already flooding across the border from mainland China. 1 million arrived in the late 1940s alone. The city exploded outward. Apartment towers went up in every direction. The airport had once sat at the edge of things. Now it sat in the middle of everything, with no way out. That was the trap. Kai Tak had water on 3 sides and a granite mountain range on the 4th. The mountains peaked above 2,000 feet, directly in the path of any sensible approach. So engineers built one that wasn't sensible. They installed a radio guidance beam for runway 13 that pointed not at the runway, but 47 degrees away from it, aimed toward that painted checkerboard on Checkerboard Hill. Pilots followed the beam down over the harbor, spotted the orange squares at around 650 feet, and then disconnected the autopilot and threw the aircraft into a descending right turn, by hand, over a city of 6 million people. The plane entered the turn at 650 feet. It came out of the turn at 140 feet. After the turn, there were exactly 2 nautical miles left to touch down, and the instruments were useless for all of it. You flew by eye, by feel, by whatever you had. Pilots needed a special certification just to attempt it. Airlines wouldn't let captains try it with passengers until they'd done it in a simulator. Even then, the simulator couldn't fully prepare you. A Cathay Pacific pilot with decades on the route said foreign crews who came in once a year struggled badly, especially in poor weather. Schools in Kowloon had to install air conditioning not for the heat, but because the windows had to stay permanently shut for soundproofing. Noise levels at the airport fence hit 105 decibels. Some 380,000 residents lived inside that noise every single day. Not near it, inside it. At peak hours, there was a flight every minute. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. You waited. The engine sound faded. You picked up where you left off. The runway itself never got longer after 1975. There was nowhere to extend it. Land too fast, carry too much speed into the touchdown, and 400 tons of metal was not going to stop before the pavement ended and the harbor began. In November 1993, a China Airlines 747 touched down during Typhoon Ira with too much speed and too little runway remaining. It ran off the end and into the water. All 396 people on board survived. That afternoon, other aircraft were already using the same runway, taking off over the partially submerged wreck still visible in the shallows. By 1996, the airport was handling 29.5 million passengers a year. It had been built for 24 million. 1 in every 3 flights ran late. A night curfew banned operations between midnight and 6:30 every morning. The 3rd busiest international passenger airport in the world, and it couldn't fly at night. Something had to give. On July 6, 1998, the lights went out at Kai Tak for the last time. The director of civil aviation stood inside the control tower after the final departure and said goodbye. Then he turned off the runway lights and walked out. 6 hours later, the new airport opened on an artificial island 30 kilometers to the west, designed by Norman Foster, built by flattening a small island and reclaiming 3,000 acres of sea. It was named one of the 10 greatest construction achievements of the 20th century. But 75% of that island is reclaimed land, sitting on soft ocean floor mud. Satellite data shows it has been sinking steadily since the day it opened, most severely at the western ends of both runways. Engineers call it settlement. They monitor it constantly. Kai Tak was strangled by mountains. The airport that replaced it is being slowly swallowed by the sea. Hong Kong keeps building in places that push back, and the sea has all the time in the world.